Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In this session, we will talk about materials, traditional practices, and principles. I hope by the end of this session, you would have some know-how of the traditional practices and principles regarding the use of materials in classrooms, especially when it comes to the teaching and learning of English. Well, my dear students, one characteristic of English used in international settings is its heterogeneity, which means there are so many different varieties of English that we come across in the whole world. Although linguistic variation is found in all the natural human languages, English is unique in the sense that it is a language with multiple norms and diverse systems that are used all across the world. Well, in a traditional ELT teaching materials context, when we talk of the materials, especially textbooks and other materials, they are specifically developed for classroom use, and they tend to focus on the standard varieties of the UK variety of English or the US variety of English. Now, the linguists and the researchers, they look at it as a dominance of the inner circle. So, for example, 7th grade textbooks in Japan that were used 1997 to 2002, majority of the non-Japanese main characters are used in these books. So, the characters, they come from the inner circle of the countries. Now, what do we mean by the inner circle? These are the countries, this is the circle that includes the countries where English is spoken as a native language. So, the characters that in these Japanese books of teaching English are included. These characters come from the USA, Canada, Australia, and Scotland, and they tended to play more significant roles. Now, this is very interesting. You know, this also relates to the issues of power. This relates to the dominance of this inner circle, or the countries of this inner circle when it comes to power otherwise, because these characters would play more significant roles, producing more words, thus contributing more towards the dialogues. Now, what is the result? Automatically the result is that to the Japanese students, the sample or the model that would be provided or that they would have as an input, it would be the native speakers, English. The number of characters from the outer circle and the expanding circle other than Japan constituted less than 10% of the total. So, outside this inner circle where native speakers of English live, when you move to the outer circle or to the expanding circle where now it is expanding, where non-native speakers of English live in the outer circle, only 10% of the characters were taken from there, which is very, very significant in this regard. As far as the practices and principles for an English as an international language framework are concerned, well, how accurately the textbook and other teaching materials represent the complex reality of English today is one of many questions one must ask, evaluating, selecting, and developing the materials. In the process of the selection of materials, in the process of making choices, in the process of actually using those materials in the classroom, what is the ground reality of English in today's world? Who are the people all across the globe who are using it, etc., are important questions that need to be addressed and taken care of. Questions that teachers ask. Well, the appropriateness of levels, integration of skills being taught in the class, and quality and amount of exercises are some examples of questions that teachers ask, regardless of their commitment to bringing in the English as an international language perspective to their pedagogy. So, though they ask all these questions to themselves and they cater for them, what is neglected is bringing the international perspective of language to the classroom. All the sample activities, all the materials, all the input is, again, typically and traditionally in the native context. When it comes to the criteria for evaluating teaching materials, there are two important questions that I would talk about. Number one, which variety of English is the material based on? So when a teacher is selecting some materials to be used for various activities in an English as an international language classroom, the teacher should ask himself or herself the language that is taken as a sample or input, which variety of English it belongs to. Does it belong to the inner circle? Does it belong to the outer circle? Does it belong to the expanding circle where English is just being introduced in the world? Is it the variety my students should learn? And actually the purpose of the first question is what the second question is aiming at. Once the teacher identifies which varieties is used in that particular material, the teacher actually needs to ask himself or herself whether this is the variety that suits the needs, that suits the demands, that suits the wants of his or her learners. Another important question for a teacher of English as an international language to consider while developing materials is, does it provide adequate exposure to other varieties of English and raise enough awareness about the linguistic diversity of English? Well, in the global context of today, where English is used in multiple varieties and where people have to use it as a lingua franca, not only to, they don't have to interact with the native speakers only, but most of the times they have to interact with the non-native speakers of English living in different parts of the world through media, through internet, and in direct conversations in real life backdrops as well. This is important that they have exposure to varied varieties of English. So there are several ways to increase students' awareness of English varieties using appropriate materials. One is to use pre-packaged teaching materials that already include multiple varieties of English. Now in the market of teaching of English language, a lot of such materials are available that are designed in a way that provide various varieties. CDs that accompany the textbooks, for example, may include samples of different varieties of English, how the same text is pronounced in various different contexts, social contexts, in various ways. An example is of the listening section of the current TOEIC test of English for international communication. The test includes speakers from Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and North America. One more question that is important for the speakers of, for the writers or of the materials, or for the teachers who select those materials, is, does it represent a variety of speakers or not? Now this is important that the materials that are used in the class, it should represent all the types. It should represent both the native and the non-native type of speakers. One more question that is related to hegemony and that is related to the power issues in the broader context of societies globally is, whose cultures are represented. When for a classroom where you are teaching English as a language, if the materials that are brought are the materials from a particular culture, for example, from a native culture, so in that native culture, the language that is being used, yes, that is being taught, but alongside what is taught is that particular culture, because language and culture at the end of the day are inseparable. So the first source of cultural content is global culture, which includes topics that cut across national boundaries and are relevant to the global society as a whole. So this is one of the solutions, that a teacher can pick up such materials which have the themes of global culture, not a particular society. Topics such as world peace, environment, conversations, etc. are already very popular in English language teaching materials in this regard. The second source would be the cultures of their future interlocutors. Considering the needs of these learners, in which situations they would have to have conversations with which kind of people, basing on that, the cultures can be selected. And third possible source of cultural content for English as an international language is the materials that would be based on the learner's own culture or own context. There is yet another question for the materials designers or teachers to consider. Is it appropriate for local contexts? Whatsoever is taught, whatsoever the material is brought into the class, this is very, very important and crucial to think. Apart from the appropriateness of methodology and curriculum, the nature of material that the input that is provided, the nature of materials that the students are exposed to, is it appropriate? Is it cultural sensitive or not? This is what the teacher needs to consider. Because, what you need to understand is children from a place with a long winter and lots of snows are likely to relate to the stories about sledding and about fireplaces more easily. But those who live in tropical weather, their reactions would be different. So suggestion is not to avoid such stories, but to prepare the readers for them, or, to provide some context in which they could understand those materials more easily.